or one-footed growers, and they tend to grow up. They make a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, and the bloom spikes come out of the side. But they basically are just kind of growing in an upright fashion. These orchids never require a really big pot. Even a huge Phalaenopsis probably would never need to be in a pot any bigger than about an 8-inch pot. The other habit of growth is referred to as sympodial. And everybody knows what German iris, what the old so-called flag iris look like. You know how they grow along a rhizome. They have kind of a stem and then a leaf comes up and then a stem and then a leaf comes up. That is a sympodial type of growth, and that's the way these orchids grow. The rhizome is much shorter, but they will put up a pseudobulb and leaves and bloom. Then they'll put up another pseudobulb that comes out from here and grows up and in its season blooms. The next growth will come out from the base and it will come up and bloom. The next one will come out, and they literally grow along a flat plane, so to speak. Now some of them, like the cattleyas, the distance between these pseudobulbs may be somewhat longer. Some of them, like these oncidiums, the bulbs are really crowded together. But over time, this is going to grow over the edge of the pot. And when that occurs, you probably need to repot it, whether the potting medium is broken down or not. This plant is actually growing in lava, so this is never going to deteriorate, at least not in the next 10,000 years or so. So this plant we're going to repot when it starts growing out over the edge of the pot. But things that are growing, there's a good place to put this. Things that are growing in the sphagnum or growing in the fir bark, when this material starts to decompose, you need to get them repotted very quickly, because if you let them stay in that, if you let the roots stay too wet, the root system will rot, and you will ultimately lose the plant if you don't get it in some new medium. Yes, sir?
What is the potting medium? It looks like cinders. It's reddish and it's porous.
It's probably a lava rock.
It's a full rock.
Yep. And again, that's what virtually everything in Hawaii is potted or grown in. Now, sometimes orchids will do as this Phalaenopsis has done, and will make additional plants up on the bloom spike. See, this bloom spike originally continued on out this way, and it had blooms up and down it, and now at these little things that we call nodes up and down the bloom stem, that would be the same as these little undeveloped nodes on this bloom stem. This plant has decided to make whole new plants out on the bloom stem. Now, there are a couple of species of Phalaenopsis that just do this on their own. Ludomaniana types do. But the good news is that right now we have 3 whole new plants here that can be taken off and potted up. The bad news is that in a Phalaenopsis, when they start making whole new plants out on the bloom spike, that frequently indicates that the potting medium has gotten pretty well rotten. And if it doesn't, oh yeah. See how the roots are trying to get out of this pot. This material, if you were to look, is really starting to break down and decompose, and the roots are not especially happy. So I would repot this plant sometime pretty soon. And if you have a Phalaenopsis like this that is starting to make the little plants, by the way, if you're reading a book about orchids, they call these Keiki, K-E-I-K-I. That's the Hawaiian word for baby. And if you see a plant starts making kikis up on the top, get the plant repotted, because it probably means that the root system is not in real good shape. Now, developing little plantlets up on the flower spike, and this occurs not only in Phalaenopsis, but a number of the other monopodial type growers. Once the roots get to be about this long, you can literally just break them free from the bloom spike, or take a sharp knife and cut them off, pot them up. These plants are genetically identical to this plant, so the blooms that come out on these, and these actually probably will bloom within a year or so, the blooms on these will look just exactly like the blooms did on this parent plant. Yes, sir?
I was wondering why you would recommend the fir bark over lava rock, since the fir bark breaks down. I know it looks good. I'm going to say looks would be one reason for using that over the lava.
That's a real good question, and number one, good lava rock is harder to find. A lot of it has a lot of salt residue in it that's hard on the root systems. And if you're using chemical fertilizers, which most orchid growers unfortunately still do, with the lava rock, if you're in very hard water like we are here, you will get a salt buildup on the lava rock, and the salt buildup will burn the roots. I suspect if you're using a more organic or natural product like our natural solutions for the has to grow, that won't be such an issue. But in really hard water like we have here, you get a lot more salt buildup on lava rock than you will, in a fir bark mix, and that's the reason most people around here don't use the lava. Go to Hawaii, like I say, where they don't have the salty water. Lava's about all you see things grown in.
You could also use the water like from your dehumidifiers.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could use rainwater. You can, and you'll have less of a salt buildup. But depending on the type of fertilizer you use, you may be putting a lot of salty things into that water. Now, a few other things just in general about orchids. One reason that orchids are a little more expensive than some other kinds of flowering plants is when you get a kalanchoe or a chrysanthemum, that plant was grown from a cutting and it took 28 weeks to make a nice big blooming plant out of it. When you get many other kinds of plants, you're getting plants that have been grown from seed. Maybe getting a big pot of impatiens or begonias or things like that. Those made a nice big blooming plant in about 8 to 15 weeks. When you plant orchid seed, depending on the type of orchid, it's going to be a minimum. Now Phalaenopsis grow quickly from seed. You'll get your first flowers about 4 years after you plant the seed on a Phalaenopsis. Some of these Oncidiums probably be at least 6 years. Some of them, like Rhynchostylus, Vandopsis, some of the slower growing types, it will easily be 10 or 12 years before you see the first flowering from that plant when you plant the seed. And by the way, the seed is as fine as dust. You can't just sprinkle it in a pot and have it grow, at least not very much of it grow. Orchid seed is started in a glass bottle growing on a nutrient agar solution these days. That's the way virtually all of them are started. They are grown on, well, same sort of culture you grow bacteria culture on, same sort of medium. The plants, when they're 2 years old, may be this tall. They start out as a little round green ball called a protocorm. The way that they are grown, that first bottle, and it's an interesting process. And if you get into orchids, you're going to read books, you're going to see how this works. You're working in a sterile environment, usually in a glove box or what they call a laminar airflow hood, and you open the bottle up, you spread a bunch of seed on there, you close it up, you put it on your light stand or whatever, and gradually it turns green. After about a year, you may actually see little plants. They're about this big. Then you go and you take this bottle that they call a mother flask, which probably has 5,000 little developing protocorms in it. You open it back up, and you scrape out and very carefully separate out about 50 or 100 little protocorms and spread them out in a second bottle. So from your one mother flask, you may make 100 or more of the secondary flask. And you let that grow on for another year. Now the little plants are about this big. At this point, they're actually ready to come out of the bottle, and they are normally planted into what we call community pots, which would be a little pot about this size to put about 15 or 20 plants in. Let them grow for another year. Then they're up about this big, and you can take them out and put them in their own pots for the first time. And in 1 to 3 to 10 years later, you will actually see the first flowers on that plant.
So this lady with the thimble, she was onto something.
Very definitely, very definitely. And it's one reason that I find, and I've known a lot of orchid growers over the years. I at one time was the youngest judge in the American Orchid Society in the country, and have had the pleasure of visiting over a pretty wide area with other orchid growers and judges. And I find that orchid growers, especially the hybridizers, tend to live to a very ripe old age. And I say this about gardeners in general. You've probably heard me say it. I think gardeners